Have you ever been told you're not good enough, that your time has passed? For Aria. Vance at 42, those weren't just fears. They were the parting words of her husband of 20 years. He called her too old to date a relic to be discarded for a younger model. He paraded his new life while she was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered confidence in the quiet dust of her art studio. But what happens when the world you thought was over is actually just beginning? What happens when the woman deemed worthless is suddenly seen as priceless by one of the most powerful men in the world? Stay with me, because this isn't a fairy tale. It's a story of brutal karma, shocking twists, and a comeback so stunning it landed on the cover of every magazine he ever dreamed of being in. The words echoed in the cavernous minimalist apartment that had once been her home. Let's be honest, Aria. You're letting yourself go. You're 42. Who's going to want to start over with a woman your age, Richard Vance? Her husband of 2 decades hadn't shouted. He never did. He delivered his cruelty with the cool, calculated precision of a surgeon slicing away at her self-worth until only the raw, bleeding wound of insecurity remained. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Upper East Side apartment, his silhouette framed against the glittering Manhattan skyline, a city that suddenly felt alien and hostile to her. He was 45, but carried himself with the preening arrogance of a man who believed he'd cheated time. His suits were Tom Ford, his watch a Patek Philippe, and his hair was just a little too dark, a little too perfect, betraying the subtle work of a high-end salon. Everything about Richard was curated for maximum impact. Aria, in her comfortable linen pants and a sweater smudged with a faint trace of oil paint, was a smudge on his pristine canvas. I have to think about my future, my image, he continued, adjusting the knot of his silk tie. I'm on the cusp of a major promotion at McKinley & Co. I need a partner who shines. Chloe, she shines. Chloe. The name tasted like ash in Aria's mouth. 25 years old, a perky social media manager, with teeth as white as her filtered Instagram photos, and an ambition that burned through her wide, doe-like eyes. Aria had seen them together at a company gala a month ago, before the charade had completely crumbled. She'd watched Richard laugh, a full-throated, genuine laugh she hadn't heard directed at her in years, as Chloe whispered something in his ear. At that moment, Aria hadn't felt jealousy, as much as a profound, bone-deep weariness. She was tired of competing in a race she never signed up for. Now the competition was over. Richard was moving his things out, though most of his designer wardrobe was already at Chloe's trendy Soho loft. He was merely here to deliver the final verdict, to officially cast her out of the life they had built. The apartment is yours, of course, he said, a gesture that sounded generous but was merely practical. It was in her name, inherited from her parents, and the settlement will be adequate. I'm not a monster, Aria. But he was. He was a monster of a different kind, one who didn't use his fists, but his words. He had spent the last 5 years subtly undermining her, chipping away at the vibrant, confident woman she used to be. Her passion art restoration was dismissed as a cute hobby. Her decision to work freelance from a small, dusty studio in Greenwich Village instead of climbing a corporate ladder was a source of constant, quiet disappointment to him. He wanted a show pony, and she was a workhorse, happiest when meticulously bringing a forgotten masterpiece back to life, her hands stained with solvents, and her focus absolute. Their mutual friends had already begun to choose sides, a silent social migration towards the man with the brighter future. Last week at a dinner party hosted by their friends, Mark and Linda, Richard had held court, Chloe giggling at his side. Aria had declined the invitation, citing a cold, but Linda had called her the next day, her voice thick with pity. "He told everyone you'd both agreed the spark was gone." Linda had relayed her voice, a conspiratorial whisper. And then, well, Rick made a toast to new beginnings and said he was glad to be with someone who still had her best years ahead of her. Then he joked that your idea of a wild night was watching Antiques Roadshow. It was awful, Aria. Mark was furious with him. But others had laughed. Aria could picture it perfectly, the sycophantic laughter of Richard's junior colleagues, the polite, uncomfortable smiles from the wives who secretly feared finding themselves in her position. Richard wasn't just leaving her. He was authoring her social obituary, painting her as a faded, frumpy, irrelevant woman. Too old, too tired, too boring. Too old to date. After he finally left, the click of the door echoing with finality, Aria walked through the silent apartment. It was filled with objects they'd acquired together, the sleek Italian sofa, the abstract sculpture he'd insisted on, the muted grey rugs. It felt like a hotel lobby, impersonal and cold. The only corner that felt like hers was the small nook by the window, where her easel stood, a half-finished landscape of the Tuscan countryside, a trip they took for their 10th anniversary, mocking her with its memory of a happier time. She sank onto the sofa, the silence pressing in on her. For 20 years her life had been Richard and Aria. Now it was just Aria. A name that felt incomplete. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Richard hadn't just taken his future. He had tried to steal her past and poison her present. He wanted her to disappear, to fade into a lonely, quiet middle age. And for a terrifying moment, sitting alone in the wreckage of her marriage, Aria Vance almost believed he was right. She felt invisible, ancient, and utterly hopelessly alone. A week crawled by in a blur of forced solitude and the deafening silence of a life uncoupled. Aria threw herself into her work, the familiar scent of turpentine and linseed oil in her small studio, a comforting balm. Here she wasn't Richard Vance's discarded wife. She was a creator, a healer of canvases. She was restoring a 17th-century Dutch portrait, the delicate craquelure of the varnish like a roadmap of time. It was a meticulous process, requiring a patience and focus that allowed her to temporarily forget the shambles of her own life. Her best friend Sarah, a sharp-witted gallery owner with a no-nonsense attitude, refused to let her wallow. "You are not hiding away like some tragic spinster in a Victorian novel," Sarah had declared over the phone. The Metropolitan Museum of Art's annual Restoration Fund Gala is on Saturday. The piece you restored for the museum's new wing, the Vermeer, is being unveiled. You are going. You will wear the ridiculously expensive Chanel dress you bought 2 years ago and never wore, and you will hold your head so high you'll get a neck cramp. End of discussion. Aria had protested the idea of navigating a sea of smiling faces and polite inquiries feeling like a fresh form of torture. But Sarah was relentless. Richard wants you to disappear. The single greatest act of defiance is to be seen, and to look fabulous while doing it. So on Saturday night, Aria found herself standing near the Temple of Denda, a glass of champagne in her hand that trembled slightly. The Chanel dress, a deep sapphire silk that fell in elegant folds, felt like armor. She had her hair styled in a soft chignon, revealing the graceful line of her neck, and wore the simple pearl earrings her grandmother had left her. Looking in the mirror before she left, she hadn't seen a frumpy old woman. She'd seen a stranger, one who looked poised and elegant, but whose eyes held a deep, bruised vulnerability. The gala was a glittering affair, a swarm of New York's elite. She saw faces she recognized from society pages, titans of industry, and their immaculately preserved wives. It was Richard's world, not hers. She felt like an imposter. After a brief, congratulatory chat with the museum's curator, who praised her miraculous work on the Vermeer, she felt her social energy draining away. She decided to slip away for a moment of peace, heading towards a quieter exhibit of Greco-Roman statues. Lost in thought, replaying Sarah's words of encouragement in her head, she turned a corner too quickly. Her arm bumped into a hard object person, and the champagne in her glass sloshed a pale gold arc, splashing directly onto the front of a man's impeccably tailored tuxedo. Mortification washed over her. Oh my God, I am so sorry I wasn't looking where I was going. How clumsy of me. She fumbled in her clutch for a tissue, dabbing uselessly at the dark, spreading stain on his crisp white shirt. Please don't worry about it, a deep, calm voice replied. A tuxedo is merely a uniform for penguins and philanthropists. This one has seen worse. She finally looked up her gaze, meeting a pair of startlingly intelligent grey eyes. The man was tall, with a lean build that the tuxedo couldn't hide. His hair was dark, with distinguished streaks of silver at the temples, and his face was all sharp angles and quiet intensity. He looked to be in his late 40s, and there was an aura of stillness about him that was magnetic in the bustling room. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes held a glimmer of amusement. Still, I've ruined your shirt, Arya lamented, feeling her cheeks flush. It's a minor casualty in the war against social obligations, he said with a wry half-smile. He gestured to the stain. Think of it as a Jackson Pollock, spontaneous, chaotic, and open to interpretation. His comment was so unexpected that a genuine laugh escaped her lips, the first in what felt like an eternity. In that case, I should probably sign it. I'd prefer your name, he said, his gaze direct, but not predatory. It was simply interested. Arya. Arya Vance. Damien Sterling, he replied, offering a hand. The name registered with a jolt. Damien Sterling wasn't just a name. He was the name. A reclusive tech billionaire who had revolutionized data encryption in his 20s and then pivoted to philanthropy and art collection. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his company, Sterling Enterprises, was a behemoth that Richard's firm was desperately trying to court. He was a ghost, a legend in the business world, and she had just christened him with cheap champagne. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice a little breathless. I'm even more sorry now. Please call me Damien. And there's no need to be. It was a welcome distraction. He glanced around the crowded hall with a look of faint distaste. I'm not much for these events. I'm only here because I'm on the museum's board. And he added, his eyes finding the Vermeer in the distance. I wanted to see the restored woman with a lute up close. The work is breathtaking. The artist who brought it back to life has a remarkable hand. Arya's heart skipped a beat. I'm that artist, she said softly. I did the restoration. Damien's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine fascination. He looked from the painting back to her, a slow, appraising gaze that had none of Richard's dismissiveness. It was a look of pure, unadulterated respect. You're Arya Vance, he said, the name sounding different this time, as if he was truly seeing her for the first time. Your use of the trateggio technique to in-paint the losses is masterful. Most restorers are too heavy-handed. You have a reverence for the original artist's intent. It's a rare quality. She was stunned. He wasn't just paying a compliment. He was speaking her language. He understood the nuance, the technical skill involved. Richard had once glanced at a similar project and asked if she'd finished her paint by numbers yet. For the next hour they stood in that quiet corner, the glittering party fading into a muted backdrop. They didn't talk about his wealth or her recent divorce. They talked about art. They debated the merits of Caravaggio's chiaroscuro, the emotion in Rothko's colour fields, and the quiet dignity of a well-preserved artifact. He spoke with a passion that matched her own, his knowledge, vast, but his curiosity even greater. For the first time in years, Arya felt seen. Not as a wife, an ex-wife, or a woman of a certain age, but as an expert, an artist, a person of substance. When Damien Sterling looked at her, he didn't see someone who was past her prime. He saw the person she was, and the person she had forgotten she could be. The accidental collision had spilled some champagne, but it felt like it had washed away something else, too, the lingering stain of Richard's disdain. The gala ended, but the conversation did not. Damien walked Arya to the museum's grand entrance, the cool night air, a refreshing change from the stuffy ballroom. The usual scrum of paparazzi was stationed outside their flashes, intermittently lighting up the night as celebrities and socialites departed. Damien expertly guided her away from the main exit toward a discreet side street, where a sleek, dark Bentley waited, its driver standing silently by the door. "I don't normally do this," he began, his tone measured, "but I find I'm not quite finished with our conversation about the Dutch masters. Would you allow me to call you sometime this week? I'd be very interested to learn more about your process." It was a professional inquiry, impeccably polite, yet Arya could feel a current of something more beneath the surface. It was the thrill of being recognized for her mind, for her talent. "I'd like that very much," she said, a genuine smile gracing her lips. She gave him the number for her studio, a place that was solely hers, untainted by Richard. As the Bentley pulled away, Arya stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the city lights seeming brighter, friendlier. The crushing weight of the past week had lifted, replaced by a fragile, unfamiliar flutter of optimism. It wasn't about a billionaire's attention. It was about the spark of her own identity, being reignited by someone who saw its value. True to his word, Damien called 3 days later. He didn't suggest dinner or drinks. Instead, he asked if he could visit her studio. "I'm a tactile person," he explained. "I understand things best when I can see them in their native environment." The request sent a ripple of panic through her, followed by a surge of pride. Her studio was her sanctuary, but it was also a mess of rags, solvents, easels, and works in progress. It was the antithesis of the polished, curated world she had shared with Richard. After a frantic hour of artistic tidying, she decided to leave it as it was. It was her space. Authentic. Real. When Damien arrived, he was dressed not in a bespoke suit, but in a simple grey cashmere sweater, dark jeans, and worn leather boots. He looked less like a magnate and more like a university professor on his day off. He entered the studio with a quiet reverence, his eyes scanning every detail, the jars of pigments, the books on art history, stacked high, the massive northern light window she'd had installed. "This is a wonderful space," he said, his voice low. "It feels real, productive." He spent 2 hours there. He asked her to walk him through the restoration of a damaged 19th century landscape, listening with rapt attention as she explained the painstaking process of solvent testing, varnish removal, and in-painting. He examined her tools, asked about the chemical composition of her fillers, and discussed the ethical dilemmas of conservation versus restoration. He was not a dilettante. He was a scholar. "I recently acquired the Dubois collection from a private estate in France," he said, his gaze fixed on a delicate porcelain vase she was mending. "It's a small but significant collection of impressionist sketches and several early Renaissance portraits. Unfortunately, they were poorly stored. They need a sensitive hand, someone who will preserve their soul, not just their image." He paused, turning to face her. I'd like to commission you to restore the entire collection, Aria. Name your price, and I'd like to provide you with a proper space. My penthouse has an empty floor with perfect atmospheric controls and northern light. We could build you a state-of-the-art studio there." Aria was speechless. The Dubois collection was legendary among art historians. To be asked to work on it was the commission of a lifetime. It was a level of trust and professional validation that she had only dreamed of. The financial independence it would offer was staggering. It was more than just a project. It was a lifeline. It was a future. I don't know what to say, Damien. Yes. Absolutely, yes. Over the next few weeks, a new rhythm established itself. Aria began working on the first pieces of the collection, which were moved to her small studio while the larger one was being prepared. Damien would stop by 2 or 3 times a week, ostensibly to check on the progress. But their meetings quickly evolved. They would talk for hours, their conversations meandering from the art on her easel to philosophy, technology, and their pasts. She learned about his solitary childhood, his brilliant but emotionally distant parents, and his disillusionment with the corporate world he now dominated. He learned about her love for her craft, the quiet joy she found in her work, and eventually the painful story of her marriage. She told him not with self-pity, but with a kind of detached surprise, as if she were describing someone else's life. He made you feel small so he could feel big. Damien said one afternoon, his voice laced with a cold anger that was more potent than any shouting. "It's the oldest, most pathetic trick in the book. A man of true confidence builds up the woman beside him. He doesn't tear her down to use her pieces as a stepladder." His words were a balm on a wound she didn't realize was still so open. Meanwhile, news of her separation had solidified in her old social circle. Richard was making sure of it. She heard through Sarah that he was telling people the split was for the best, as he needed a woman with more energy. He was painting a picture of himself as a victim of a passionless, stale marriage, now reborn with the vibrant Chloe. He'd scoffed when he heard a rumor that Aria was doing some freelance work for a wealthy client. Good for her, he'd apparently said to Mark over drinks, his tone dripping with condescension. It's nice she has a little hobby to keep her busy. Probably some lonely old widow who needs her paintings dusted. As long as she's happy. Richard had no idea who her client was. The name Damien Sterling was never mentioned in the circles they now travelled in. He was a phantom too high up for the mid-level executive gossip chain. Richard saw her new life as a small, pitiful epilogue to their grand story. He had no concept that she wasn't writing an epilogue. She was starting an entirely new book, and the protagonist was finally herself, while Auria's world was quietly expanding, filled with the scent of old canvas and the thrill of intellectual camaraderie. Richard's was becoming increasingly narrow, defined by a single all-consuming goal, landing the Sterling Enterprises account. At McKinley & Co., the Sterling account was the stuff of legend. It was the white whale. Damien Sterling was notoriously resistant to consulting firms viewing them as parasites that offered jargon-filled presentations instead of genuine solutions. But his company was planning a massive expansion into sustainable data centers, a multi-billion-dollar initiative, and for the first time, they were rumored to be seeking external strategic guidance. Landing that contract wouldn't just mean a promotion for Richard. It would make him a god within the firm. Richard threw himself at the project with a desperate fervor. He assembled a team, pulling all-nighters, creating endless PowerPoint decks filled with synergy maps and growth paradigms. He was trying to find a way in a crack in the fortress that was Damien Sterling's inner circle. He spent tens of thousands on corporate intelligence reports trying to profile the man. The reports were thin, painting a picture of a brilliant, ruthless, and intensely private individual whose only known passion outside of technology was art. Art, Richard muttered to his team during one late-night strategy session. The guy spends millions on old paintings. Find out what he likes. Find out which galleries he frequents. Maybe we can sponsor an exhibit, get our name in front of him. His life with Chloe was also beginning to lose its glossy sheen. The initial thrill of her youth and adoring gaze was being replaced by the grating reality of their incompatibility. Chloe's conversations revolved around TikTok trends, reality TV celebrities, and which Balenciaga bag she wanted next. She was bored by his work, her eyes glazing over whenever he tried to talk about the Sterling account. One evening, he came home late, exhausted, and smelling of stale office coffee to find her taking selfies in a new dress. "Babe, look," she said, pouting her lips at her phone. "Do you think this makes me look more like an influencer or a model?" "It looks expensive," he grunted, loosening his tie. "Did you see the proposal I left on the table? I need you to look it over for typos." Chloe lowered her phone, her smile vanishing. "Ugh, Ricky, that's so boring. I'm not your secretary. Can't we just go to that new place? Aria? I saw that Kendall Jenner ate there, and I'm dying to go." The cracks were becoming impossible to ignore. He had traded comfortable companionship for decorative arm candy, and the decoration was proving to be high maintenance and emotionally vacant. He found himself thinking with a surprising pang of not regret, but something like it, of how Aria would have listened, asked intelligent questions, and offered insightful comments. She would have understood the stakes, but he'd told himself that was the past. Chloe was the future, a bright, shiny, expensive future. Unbeknownst to him, his past and his future were on a collision course. In the stunning museum-like studio Damien had built for her on the top floor of his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Aria was thriving. Her work on the Dubois collection was more fulfilling than anything she had ever done. Her confidence, nurtured by Damien's unwavering respect, had returned in full force. Their friendship had deepened, evolving into something quiet, tender, and profound. They shared dinners on his terrace, went for long, anonymous walks through the park, and discovered a shared, dry sense of humor. He made her laugh. More importantly, he made her feel like herself again. One afternoon, as she was meticulously cleaning a small Renoir sketch, Damien entered the studio, holding 2 plane tickets. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his usual serious expression softened by a smile. "There is an exclusive auction in Geneva next week. A recently discovered Degas sculpture is the main item. I have to be there to bid on it for my foundation's collection. I was hoping my lead art consultant would accompany me." Aria's heart fluttered. It was more than a business trip. Geneva. It sounded impossibly glamorous, a world away from the dusty solitude she had been sentenced to just a few months prior. "I think your consultant would be honored to attend," she replied, her eyes sparkling. Meanwhile, Richard had finally secured a meeting. Not with Damien Sterling himself, but with his formidable chief operating officer, a woman known to be the gatekeeper of his empire. The meeting was in 2 weeks. It was his one shot. He told Chloe the news, expecting her to be thrilled. "That's great, honey," she'd said, barely looking up from her phone. "Does that mean you can get me the new Cartier bracelet?" Richard felt a cold knot of dread in his stomach. He was sacrificing everything for a future with a woman who didn't care about him, only what he could provide. He was running on a treadmill, chasing a prize that seemed to move further away with every step. He was so focused on the finish line, the Sterling account, that he failed to see the monumental karma-fueled pile-up that was waiting for him just around the corner. He was about to find out exactly who Aria's lonely old widow client really was. Geneva was a dream. The crisp air off the lake, the old-world elegance of the city, and the quiet luxury of the Four Seasons Hotel, where Damien had booked them, separate but adjoining suites, felt like stepping into another life. For the first time since the divorce, Arya felt not just content, but truly deeply happy. The auction was held in a private, opulent villa overlooking the water. It was an exclusive event, the guest list, a veritable who's who of the world's wealthiest collectors and museum patrons. Arya, in a simple but elegant black gown, felt a thrill of excitement rather than the insecurity she'd felt at the Met Gala. This time she wasn't an outsider. She was here as a respected expert, Damien Sterling's personal consultant. Damien was a different person in this environment. He was decisive-focused and commanded a quiet authority that was mesmerizing to watch. During the bidding for the Degas, he was a silent predator, waiting until the last possible moment to enter the fray, his calm, final bid silencing all competitors. He won the sculpture for his foundation, and the room broke into a ripple of respectful applause. After the auction, they attended a small private dinner for the top bidders. It was there on a candlelit terrace, with the lights of Geneva twinkling below, that the moment happened. Damien was telling her a story about his first-ever art purchase, a clumsy, sentimental landscape he'd bought at a student fair, and Arya was laughing her head, tilted back, her face illuminated by the soft light. In that moment, she looked radiant, carefree, and beautiful. Damien fell silent, his gaze fixed on her. The air between them shifted, charged with a new intensity. He reached across the small table and gently took her hand. "Arya," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This started as a commission, a partnership. But it's become something more for me. I hope it has for you too." Her breath hitched. She had felt it too, of course. The growing affection, the deep connection that went beyond their shared passion. Looking into his sincere grey eyes, she saw her future not one defined by what she had lost, but by what she was now finding. "Yes, Damien," she whispered back. "It has." He smiled, a rare, brilliant smile that transformed his face. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Neither of them noticed the long lens of a photographer hidden in the gardens below. The European press was far more aggressive in its pursuit of the reclusive billionaire. They had been trying for years to get a candid shot, to uncover the secrets of the man who had everything but seemed to want no one. A shot of him holding hands with a mystery woman, looking at her with such open adoration that wasn't just a picture. It was a front-page story. A week later, Arya was back in her studio in New York, the magical trip to Geneva, a warm, shimmering memory. She and Damien had agreed to take things slow, to let their new relationship unfold naturally away from the prying eyes of the world. Or so they thought. It was Sarah who broke the news. She burst into the studio, her face pale, holding up a copy of Prestige magazine, the glossy, high society publication that was a staple on every coffee table on Park Avenue. "You might want to sit down," Sarah said, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and glee. On the cover, in stunning high resolution, was the photo from the terrace in Geneva. Arya and Damien, hands, clasped her, laughing him, looking at her with an expression of pure devotion. The lighting was perfect, the setting impossibly romantic. They looked like a couple in a movie. The headline in bold, elegant font read, "Damien Sterling's Mystery Muse, the woman captivating the world's most elusive billionaire." Inside a 3-page spread, detailed Damien's winning bid at the auction and speculated wildly about his companion. A reporter had done some digging. They had identified her as Arya Vance, a highly respected art conservationist. The article praised her natural elegance and intellectual grace, framing her not as a trophy, but as a woman of substance who had clearly captured the heart of a man no one thought had one. It was the polar opposite of the narrative Richard had been spinning. Arya stared at the magazine, her heart pounding. Her quiet, private world had just exploded. Meanwhile, across town, Richard Vance was walking into his office, feeling on top of the world. His big meeting with Sterling's COO was that afternoon. He'd barely slept, fueled by caffeine and ambition. He greeted his secretary, grabbed his coffee, and strode towards his corner office. Lying squarely in the middle of his mahogany desk was a copy of the very same magazine. His junior analyst, a young man named Tim, had put it there. "Morning, Richard," Tim said, hovering by the door with a strange expression. "Thought you might want to see this. It's about the guy. Sterling. Crazy, huh? No one even knew he was dating." Richard picked up the magazine, a smug smile on his face. "Let's see what the competition looks like." He chuckled, expecting to see some 20-something supermodel. He looked at the cover. His smile froze, then melted from his face, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. He stared at the woman laughing in the photograph, the woman whose elegance was being celebrated, the woman on the arm of the man he was desperately trying to impress. It was Arya, his ex-wife, the too old, boring, over-the-hill woman he had discarded and mocked. There she was on the cover of Prestige magazine, looking happier and more beautiful than he had seen her in a decade, holding hands with the billionaire who held Richard's entire future in his hands. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers, crashing to the floor and shattering, splashing, scalding liquid and ceramic shards across his expensive Italian shoes. But Richard didn't even flinch. He couldn't feel a thing except the blood draining from his face and the terrifying, sinking realization that he had made a catastrophic, career-ending, life-altering mistake. The silence in Richard's office was absolute, broken only by the faint drip of coffee from his desk onto the stained rug. Tim the analyst quickly backed out of the room, sensing a storm of biblical proportions was about to break. Richard continued to stare at the magazine, cover his mind, struggling to process the impossible reality before him. Arya, Damien Sterling. It didn't compute. The worlds were not supposed to collide. His discarded past was not supposed to become the gatekeeper to his glorious future. His phone began to buzz incessantly. The first call was from Mark, his supposed friend. "Rich, did you see it?" Is that our Arya?" Mark's voice was a cocktail of shock and poorly concealed amusement. "I'll be damned. You told us she was taking up knitting." The next call was from his boss, John Sterling. No relation, a cruel irony. Richard was now keenly aware of the senior partner at McKinley & Co. John's voice was not amused. It was dangerously cold. "Vance. My office. Now. And bring that magazine with you." The walk to John's office felt like a walk to the gallows. Colleagues he passed in the hallway averted their eyes, while others whispered behind their hands. The news had spread through the firm like wildfire. The man leading the Sterling pitch had been married to Damien Sterling's new partner, and had apparently spent the last 6 months publicly trashing her. John was standing by his window, looking down at the city below. He didn't turn around when Richard entered. "For 6 months, Richard, you've been telling me you have the perfect strategy to get in the door with Sterling." John said, his voice quiet but menacing. "You've wasted millions in man-hours and resources. All this time, you literally had the key to the front door and you threw it in the garbage and then set the garbage on fire." "John, I had no idea." Richard began, his voice raspy. "That's the point." John spun around, his face purple with rage. He jabbed a finger at the magazine Richard was clutching. "You didn't know because you didn't care. You were so busy building your little narrative about your brilliant new life and your washed-up ex-wife that you never bothered to see what she was actually doing. We could have leveraged this connection. A quiet introduction, a charity dinner. But no, from what I'm hearing, you've spent months bad-mouthing her to anyone who would listen. Do you have any idea how this makes us look? How it makes you look? Richard stood there, mute. He had no defense. Every condescending joke, every pitying comment, every lie he had told to make himself look better now felt like a nail in his own coffin. Your meeting with the COO this afternoon is cancelled, John said flatly. They called an hour ago. The official reason was a scheduling conflict. The real reason, I suspect, is that Damien Sterling would rather set his own money on fire than give a single dollar to the firm that employs his partner's classless idiot ex-husband. You're off the account. Go home, Richard. I'll decide what to do with you on Monday. Stumbling out of the office in a daze, Richard was met with a wall of schadenfreude. The whispers were louder now. He heard a junior partner mutter calm as a bitch as he passed. He fled the building, the shame so intense it was a physical force pushing him out onto the street. The fallout in his personal life was just as swift and brutal. Linda Mark's wife, who had always been more Aria's friend than his, left him a voicemail that was dripping with ice. I just wanted you to know, Richard, that I am so incredibly happy for Aria. She deserves every bit of this. And you deserve this too. Don't ever call us again. But the final, most devastating blow came when he got back to the soullessly trendy loft he shared with Chloe. He found her in the bedroom, surrounded by Louis Vuitton suitcases. She was packing. She held up her phone, showing him the prestige cover on an Instagram feed. "Is this for real?" she asked, her voice flat, her eyes cold and calculating. "Chloe, listen." "No, you listen," she snapped, tossing a pile of expensive lingerie into a bag. "I hitched my wagon to you because you were going places. You were the big shot executive, the man with a plan. Now you're a joke. You're the guy who dumped his wife right before she hit the jackpot. You're not a winner, Ricky. You're the guy who fumbled the ball on the 1-yard line." She zipped up a suitcase with a vicious tug. "All my friends are sending me this. They're laughing at me. At us. I'm not going to be the consolation prize for the man who was too stupid to see what he had." She gestured around the apartment. "This was fun. But I'm not sticking around for the sequel where the big shot gets demoted and can't afford my lifestyle anymore. The Chanel bags and the keys to the Porsche are in my car. Consider them a severance package." And with that, she walked out, leaving Richard standing alone in the middle of the room, surrounded by the expensive, empty trappings of a life that had just imploded. He had lost his career-defining project, his friends, his girlfriend, and his dignity, all in the space of a few hours. He sank onto the bed, his head in his hands. The image on the magazine cover burned behind his eyelids. Aria's laughing face. It wasn't a look of triumph or revenge. It was a look of genuine, unadulterated joy. A joy she had found only after he was gone. He hadn't just lost her. He had been the obstacle to her happiness. And in his arrogance, he had paved the way for her to find someone who saw the value in her that he had been too blind and too insecure to ever appreciate. The karma was no longer a distant concept. It was a crushing, suffocating reality. Desperation is a powerful and ugly motivator. In the days that followed his spectacular implosion, Richard cycled through the stages of grief, landing hard on a toxic blend of denial and bargaining. He couldn't accept that this was his new reality. He convinced himself that this was all a misunderstanding, a fleeting, glamorous fling for Aria. He believed with the breathtaking arrogance that was his defining characteristic that he could fix it. He needed to talk to her. to explain, to appeal to their shared history, to manipulate. He started with texts. At first they were cautiously apologetic. "Arya, I saw the magazine. Wow, we need to talk." When she didn't reply, they became more insistent. "I know I handled things badly. I was under a lot of pressure. I miss you." Silence. Finally, they took on a desperate, pleading tone. "Please, Arya, don't throw away 20 years for some guy you just met. My life is falling apart." When the texts went unanswered, he moved on to phone calls, leaving long, rambling voicemails. He tried every tactic he could think of. Guilt after all I've done for you. Nostalgia. Remember that trip to Italy, and even veiled threats. "You don't know a guy like Sterling. He'll chew you up and spit you out." Arya listened to the first voicemail, her stomach churning, then deleted the rest without hearing them. Each unheard message was an act of cutting another cord to her past. She discussed it with Damien, who listened patiently, his expression hardening with each detail she shared. "You don't owe him a response," Damien said, his voice firm but gentle. "You don't owe him closure. You gave him 20 years of your life. You owe him nothing more." "I know," Arya said, looking out the window of the studio at the sprawling expanse of Central Park. "But a part of me feels like I need to say my piece. Not for him, for me. To close the book myself." Damien nodded, understanding. "Then we'll do it on your terms. And you won't do it alone." A few days later, Richard, his hair unkempt and dark circles under his eyes, showed up unannounced at her old studio in Greenwich Village, the only address he had for her. He had been demoted at work, stripped of his key accounts, and relegated to a glorified administrative role. He was a pariah. This was his last, desperate gambit. He buzzed the intercom, and to his shock the door clicked open. He climbed the familiar creaky stairs, his heart pounding with a strange mix of hope and dread. He found Arya inside, calmly packing some of her remaining books and tools into boxes. She looked serene, dressed in simple jeans and a sweater, but there was a new strength in her posture, an unshakable core of confidence he'd never seen before. "Arya, thank God," he began, rushing forward. "I'm so sorry. I was an idiot, a complete blind fool. Chloe is gone. My job is a nightmare. I made a terrible mistake. I want you back." She didn't react. She simply folded a canvas cloth and placed it in a box. "No, you don't, Richard. You want your old life back. You want the convenience, the comfort, the ego boost. You don't want me. You haven't wanted me for a very long time." "That's not true," he insisted, his voice cracking. "I love you." Arya finally stopped and turned to face him, her eyes clear and steady. "The words you used when you left. Too old. Letting yourself go. Do you think I've forgotten them? Those weren't words said in anger, Richard. That's what you truly believed. You looked at me and saw a liability, a faded asset you needed to liquidate." She took a step closer, her voice dropping but losing none of its power. "The irony is you were right. I was letting myself go. I was letting myself shrink to fit into the small, sad box you built for me. The woman you thought was boring was just exhausted from trying to be someone you would approve of. The moment you left was the moment I started to breathe again." He stared at her, speechless. This calm, articulate, powerful woman was a stranger to him. "I'm not angry at you anymore, Richard," she continued. "I just feel pity. You spent our entire marriage obsessed with image, with what other people thought. And now your own obsession with image is what has destroyed you. That's the real karma. Damien didn't do this to you. Chloe didn't do this to you. You did this to yourself." As if on cue, the studio door opened, and Damien Sterling walked in. He didn't say a word. He simply stood beside Arya, a quiet, solid presence. He wasn't there to threaten or intimidate. He was just there, a silent testament to the new reality. His presence said, "Everything she is with me. She is protected. You are no longer relevant." Richard looked from Damien's calm, unreadable face to Arya's resolute one. The last vestiges of his hope crumbled into dust. He was utterly comprehensively defeated. He had come here for a confrontation, for a chance to claw back his life. Instead, he had received a quiet, dignified eulogy for the man he used to be. He turned and walked away without another word. As he descended the creaky stairs, he heard the sound of a box being taped shut. A final symbolic sealing of the past. He stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, a ghost in a city that no longer recognized him. 6 months later, the name Richard Vance was a footnote, a cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms of McKinley & Co. about the man who had it all and threw it away. He kept his job, but it was a gilded cage, a well-paid position with no power, no prestige, and no future. He was a constant walking reminder of a colossal failure. He sold the loft he'd shared with Chloe at a loss and moved into a sterile corporate apartment. He was 46 alone, and his best years were definitively, irrevocably behind him. Arya's best years, however, were just beginning. The grand opening of the Vance Restoration Atelier was the most talked-about event of the New York art season. It wasn't a vanity project funded by a wealthy lover. It was a world-class institution. Damien had provided the seed capital, but Arya had built the empire. Located in a beautifully renovated Tribeca loft, the atelier was a state-of-the-art conservation facility and a curated gallery space. Arya had hand-picked a team of the best young restorers in the country, mentoring them, creating a collaborative and innovative environment. She was no longer just a restorer. She was a luminary. Museums from around the world, the Louvre, the Prado, the Getty were consulting with her. Artisan Weekly had run a cover story on her, not as Damien Sterling's partner, but as a revolutionary force in the world of art conservation. The headline read, "Arya Vance, Preserving the Past, Shaping the Future." The article celebrated her unique blend of artistic sensitivity and scientific rigor. On the opening night, the atelier was buzzing with energy. Art critics, museum directors, artists and patrons mingled champagne glasses in hand, admiring the inaugural exhibition, selected pieces from the restored Dubois collection. The paintings and sketches glowed under the gallery lights, vibrant and alive, each one a testament to Arya's skill and passion. Arya stood near the entrance, radiant in a dark green silk dress that complemented the silver that now openly graced her temples. She wore it with the same confidence that she wore her success. She was talking with the director of the MoMA when Damien came up behind her, slipping a supportive arm around her waist. "You did it," he whispered in her ear, his voice filled with pride. She turned and smiled at him, a deep, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "We did it," she corrected softly. Their relationship had blossomed away from the public eye. They were partners in every sense of the word, intellectual, emotional, and romantic. He challenged her, supported her, and celebrated her, never once trying to overshadow her light, only basking in its warmth. Looking around the crowded room at the life she had built from the ashes of her old one, Arya felt a profound sense of peace. Her story wasn't about getting revenge on an ex-husband. It wasn't even about being swept off her feet by a billionaire. That was just the catalyst. Her real story was about reclaiming her own value. It was about the masterpiece she had become when she finally had the space, the tools and the freedom to restore herself. Richard's cruel words, Who's going to want to start over with a woman your age?" echoed faintly in her memory. But they no longer had any power. They were the words of a small man, incapable of seeing the masterpiece for the dust. He had been wrong. Her age wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of her expertise, her wisdom, her confidence. A young reporter from the New York Times approached her. "Ms. Vance, an incredible night. Everyone is saying you're the most influential new voice in the art world. How does it feel?" Aria looked from the reporter to Damien, then out at the incredible gallery she had created. She thought of the quiet, invisible woman she had been, and the vibrant, celebrated woman she was now. "It feels," she said, her voice clear and strong, "like I'm just getting started." And that's where Aria's new chapter begins. Her story serves as a powerful real-world reminder that your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Richard's world crumbled not because of some magical curse, but because it was built on a fragile foundation of ego and appearances. Aria's world flourished because it was built on the bedrock of genuine talent, passion, and self-respect. Karma, in the end, isn't about revenge. It's about the natural consequences of our own actions and the quiet, steady triumph of substance over show. What did you think of Aria's incredible comeback? Was Richard's downfall deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of resilience and deserved karma, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening. What if the cruelest words spoken to you became the catalyst for your greatest triumph? For Doris Vance, the end of her marriage felt like the end of her world. Her husband, Mark, a man she had given everything to cast her aside with a final venomous curse. "You are nothing without me. You will never find love again." He left her with nothing but the echo of his laughter and a broken heart. But fate, as it turns out, has a spectacular sense of irony. Because the very next morning, Doris's life didn't just change, it exploded. She went viral, seen by millions in a single beautiful moment. A moment she shared with a billionaire who would change everything. This is the story of how one woman's rock bottom became the foundation for an empire of her own making. The silence in their minimalist, grey and white living room was heavier than any sound. It was a suffocating void, punctuated only by the crisp, deliberate sounds of Mark Jennings packing a single leather suitcase. Each click of a gold-plated latch was a gunshot to Doris Vance's heart. For 10 years, this house had been their shared dream. Now it was just a showroom for his success, and she was the outdated furniture being discarded. So that's it. Doris's voice was a raw whisper, barely audible over the frantic beating in her ears. "A decade, Mark. A decade of supporting you, of putting your career first, of believing in us. You just throw it away." Mark didn't look at her. He was too busy adjusting the collar of his bespoke Italian suit in the reflection of the large, empty television screen. He saw only himself. He always had. "Let's not be dramatic, Doris," he said, his tone smooth and condescending, the one he used on junior employees he was about to fire. "It's a simple business decision. Our partnership is no longer profitable. I've outgrown it. I've outgrown you." The clinical cruelty of his words stole her breath. She thought of all the nights she'd stayed up helping him practice presentations, the inheritance from her grandmother she'd invested in his first startup, the dreams of opening her own small artisanal bakery that she had packed away year after year because the timing was never right for him. "Outgrown me," she repeated, a bitter laugh catching in her throat. "You mean you found someone younger?" Someone who works at your new firm, right? I saw the credit card statements mark, the dinners at Le Ciel, the gifts from Tiffany's. He finally turned to face her. His handsome face, the one that used to look at her with what she'd mistaken for love, was now a mask of cold impatience. There was no remorse in his eyes, only irritation that she wasn't making this easier for him. Jessica is a distraction, he scoffed. This isn't about her. This is about you. You've let yourself go, Doris. You've lost that spark. When was the last time you did anything for yourself? You have no ambition, no drive. You just exist in my shadow. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart striking at the deepest insecurities he himself had cultivated within her. He had been the one to discourage her from taking that advanced patisserie course in France, calling it a frivolous hobby. He had been the one who convinced her that her talent was best used entertaining his clients, not building a business. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and furious. My ambition was you. My drive was us. I built my world around you, and you know it. I poured everything I had into making this life for you, and now you're taking it all and leaving me with the scraps. That's where you're wrong, he said, picking up his suitcase. He walked towards the door, pausing beside her. He looked down at her, a pitying smirk playing on his lips. I'm not leaving you with scraps. I'm leaving you with nothing. The house is in my name. The cars are leased through my company. Your bank account is, well, you know what's in there. You'll have to find your own way now. See how far that little baking hobby gets you. He was at the door now, his hand on the polished steel handle. He looked back at her one last time, his eyes sweeping over her with a final dismissive appraisal. And just so we're clear, he added his voice, dropping to a venomous whisper that would haunt her nights. Don't think you'll ever find someone else. Who would want you, a woman on the wrong side of 30, with nothing to her name and no real-world experience? You are nothing without me. You will never find love again. Remember that. He opened the door, and the sterile quiet of the hallway rushed in. He stepped out without a backward glance. The door clicked shut, the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place, echoing like a final judgment. Doris stood frozen in the center of the vast, empty room. The silence Mark left behind was different. It was a howling, predatory thing. The weight of his words pressed down on her, crushing her. Nothing without me. Never find love again. She sank to the plush dove-grey carpet, the fabric that she had spent weeks picking out, and a sob tore from her chest. It was a raw, guttural sound of a decade of life being ripped away. He was right. She had nothing. Her confidence was shattered, her identity erased. She had been Mrs. Doris Jennings for so long she had forgotten how to be just Doris Vance. She was a ghost in a house that was no longer hers, haunted by the future she had lost and terrified of the empty one that lay ahead. For hours she stayed there, huddled on the floor as the sun set, casting long, lonely shadows across the room, each one looking like the ghost of the man who had just erased her. 2 months later, the scent of expensive cologne and imported leather that had permeated Doris's old life was replaced by the comforting earthy aroma of freshly ground coffee beans and melting butter. Her spacious minimalist house was a painful memory, swapped for a tiny third-floor walk-up apartment above a laundromat. Her king-sized bed was gone, replaced by a second-hand mattress that sagged slightly in the middle, and her role as a supportive corporate wife had been unceremoniously traded for a 6 a.m. shift at the Daily Grind, a small, charmingly cluttered cafe nestled in a quieter, tree-lined part of the city. The cafe was owned by Carol, a woman in her late 60s, with flour perpetually dusted on her apron and a warmth that radiated from her like heat from her vintage ovens. She had hired Doris on the spot, seeing not the broken woman hiding behind a forced smile, but the genuine passion in her eyes when she spoke about laminated dough. "The pay is terrible, the hours are long, and the customers can be a pain," Carol had said with a frank smile. "But the coffee's good, and you can bake whatever you want with the leftover ingredients." Deal, it was the best deal Doris had ever been offered. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, the cafe became her sanctuary. Kneading dough was a form of therapy. The rhythmic pressing and folding was a way to work through the anger and grief that still ambushed her in quiet moments. She poured her heartache into her craft. Her croissants became flakier, her scones more tender, her cakes infused with a depth of flavor that spoke of her own complex sorrow. Mark's final words still echoed in her mind. "See how far that little baking hobby gets you." The memory was a spur, pushing her to be better, to be more creative. She started experimenting, using the techniques she'd only ever read about in books. She crafted delicate sugar flowers that looked astonishingly real, painted intricate landscapes on macarons with edible colors, and developed a signature brioche that was so light and airy it practically floated. Carol gave her free rein. "Honey, as long as it sells, you can turn this place into a French patisserie for all I care." And it did sell. The regulars who once came only for Carol's robust coffee started lining up for Doris's daily special. They didn't know her story, but they could taste the love and dedication in every bite. Among the regulars was a quiet, unassuming man who came in every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork. He always sat at the small table in the far corner, the one with a slight wobble that Doris kept meaning to fix. He was tall with a kind face that seemed etched with a quiet sadness of its own. He'd wear simple, well-made clothes, a grey cashmere sweater, dark jeans, worn leather boots that spoke of understated quality, not flashy wealth. He never brought a laptop or talked on the phone. He would simply order a black coffee and a single pain au chocolat, and he would sit there for an hour, nursing his drink. His gaze often drifting to the small display case where Doris's creations sat like jewels. He never made small talk beyond a polite "good morning" and "thank you," but Doris noticed the way he ate. He would break off a small piece of the pastry, examine the delicate layers, and eat it with a focused appreciation that was rare. He saw the work that went into it. For Doris, who had spent a decade having her talents overlooked, his quiet, consistent appreciation was a balm to her wounded spirit. She didn't know his name, and he didn't know hers. He was just the man in the corner, a silent, reassuring presence in her new, fragile life. One Tuesday morning, as she was arranging a new creation, a lavender-infused eclair with crystallized honey, she saw him watching her from his corner. Their eyes met for a brief moment. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval, a flicker of a smile touching his lips before he looked away. It was a tiny gesture, but for Doris, it felt like a ray of sunshine breaking through a storm cloud. It was a simple acknowledgement of her skill, her art, from a total stranger. It had no agenda, no ulterior motive. It was pure. In that moment, she realized her baking wasn't just a hobby or a job. It was her voice. It was the one part of her that Mark had never been able to touch, to criticize, or to take away. He had taken her house, her security, her past. But here in this small cafe, surrounded by the scent of sugar and yeast, she was slowly, painstakingly baking herself back to life. And she was starting to feel for the first time, in a very long time, like maybe she wasn't nothing without him after all. The bell above the cafe door chimed on a Wednesday morning, announcing a gust of cold air and a woman who commanded attention without trying. She had vibrant red hair, stylishly thick-rimmed glasses, and an aura of professional urgency. Doris recognized her instantly from the pages of Metropolis Food and Wine magazine. Cynthia Plate, one of the city's most influential and notoriously sharp-tongued food bloggers. Her review could make or break a restaurant overnight. Carol, who was wiping down the counter, stiffened. "Oh, Lord," she muttered under her breath. "Just what we need." Cynthia's eyes scanned the cafe with a critical sweep, her gaze lingering on the slightly chipped paint and the mismatched chairs before finally landing on the pastry case. Her expression was unreadable. Before she could place an order, the bell chimed again. A man named Mr. Henderson, a grumpy regular known for his perpetual scowl and loud complaints, stomped in. "Carol, this coffee is lukewarm again," he barked, slamming his reusable mug on the counter. "What am I paying for brown water?" Carol sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I'm so sorry, Robert. Let me make you a fresh one right away." "You'd better. And my usual bran muffin better not be stale. Last week, it could have been used as a doorstop." Doris watched the exchange, her heart aching for Carol, who absorbed the man's verbal blows with weary resignation. She glanced over and saw Cynthia Plate watching her pen, already poised over a small notebook. This was exactly the kind of scene that would end up in a scathing review painting the daily grind as a sad, tired establishment. Then Doris saw him. The quiet man in the corner. Julian was there, his book resting unread on the table. He was watching the scene unfold with a look of profound disappointment, not at the cafe, but at Mr. Henderson's casual cruelty. Something inside Doris snapped. It wasn't just about protecting the cafe anymore. It was about defending the kindness that Carol had shown her. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward. "Mr. Henderson." She said, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the tension. "Carol is doing her best. Perhaps your morning might improve if it began with a little more kindness and a little less complaint." Mr. Henderson turned his glare on her. "And who are you, the philosophy police? I'm the person who bakes your muffin," Doris replied smoothly. "And I have something I think you'll like much better." She moved to the display case and picked up a specially crafted pastry she had finished just that morning. It was a Queen Amman, a complex Breton cake with layers of buttery, caramelized dough. But this one was unique. On top, she had piped a delicate, intricate pattern with dark chocolate resembling the gnarled branches of a bonsai tree. She placed it on a plate and set it in front of him. "This is on the house," she said softly. "It's made with a lot of layers. Some are sweet, some are a little burnt and bitter, and some are flaky and delicate. It takes patience to make, and it takes patience to appreciate. A bit like people, I suppose." The cafe fell silent. Mr. Henderson stared at the pastry, then at Doris, completely disarmed. Cynthia Plate had stopped writing and was now watching, utterly captivated. Julian in the corner leaned forward slightly, a look of quiet astonishment on his face. Mr. Henderson, for the first time anyone could remember, was speechless. He hesitantly picked up a fork, broke off a piece, and put it in his mouth. His eyes widened. The anger on his face melted away, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated pleasure. He looked at Carol, then at Doris. This is very good," he mumbled, his voice softer. "I'm sorry, Carol. I've been having a rough time." Carol patted his hand. "We all do, Robert. We all do." Cynthia Plate didn't say a word. She simply took out her phone. She hadn't recorded the entire exchange, but she had captured the pivotal moment, Doris's gentle but firm words, the presentation of the pastry, and the profound, instantaneous change in Mr. Henderson's demeanor. She typed a quick caption, added a few hashtags, and hit post. The video was barely 60 seconds long. The caption read, "Sometimes the best food doesn't just feed your stomach, it feeds your soul." Witnessed a moment of pure class at the daily grind today. This is Doris. The world needs more Doris. War kindness angel. War the daily grind. She finally ordered a coffee and one of everything in the case, leaving a $100 bill in the tip jar. Doris flushed, and slightly trembling from the adrenaline, went back to the kitchen, her heart pounding. She had no idea what had just happened. She only knew she couldn't stand by and watch someone be cruel to Carol. From his corner, Julian watched her retreat into the kitchen. He had seen more than just a clever way to handle a difficult customer. He had seen strength, empathy, and an artistry that went far beyond baking. He had witnessed a quiet, unassuming woman use her craft to perform a small miracle. He picked up his phone and found Cynthia's post. It was already starting to gain traction. He pressed the share button. He didn't have many followers on his personal anonymous account, but a few of the ones he did have were some of the most influential people in the world. And they would see it. They would all see the magic of the woman who made his favorite pain au chocolat. Doris woke up to the sound of a relentless buzzing. For a groggy moment, she thought it was her alarm clock, but the noise was coming from her beat-up smartphone on the nightstand. She squinted at the screen, her eyes struggling to focus. She had over 1,000 new notifications. Texts, social media tags, emails. It was a digital avalanche. "Is that you read a text from an old college friend?" "Girl, you are," famous screamed another. Her heart hammered against her ribs. With trembling fingers, she opened her social media app. Cynthia Plate's post was the first thing she saw. It had exploded. The 60-second video had been viewed over 2 million times. It had been shared by celebrities, news anchors, and lifestyle gurus. The comment section was a tidal wave of positivity. This is what the world needs right now. I want to go to this cafe, and I want one of those life-changing pastries. Doris for president. Her face, her voice, her act of compassionate defiance were everywhere. The hashtag #CafeAngel was trending nationally. She felt a dizzying mix of panic and disbelief. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. The landline in her apartment, a relic she kept for emergencies, started ringing. It was Carol. "Doris, honey, are you seeing this?" Carol's voice was a mix of laughter and shock. "There's a line of people down the block. A news van just pulled up. What in heaven's name did you do? I have to go." Doris stammered, her mind reeling. Meanwhile, in a glass-walled corner office overlooking the city, Mark Jennings swiped irritably at his tablet. A junior associate had just forwarded him a link with the subject line, "Isn't this your ex-wife?" He clicked on it, his brow furrowed in annoyance. He watched the video. He saw Doris looking tired and wearing a cheap apron, but speaking with a confidence he hadn't seen in years. He saw her ridiculously ornate pastry and the stupid, adoring look on the old man's face. He read the fawning comments, the praise, the #at Cafe Angel hashtag. A hot, ugly jealousy coiled in his gut. It was absurd, a fluke, a silly, sentimental video that meant nothing. She was still just a baker in a dead-end coffee shop. He scoffed, tossing the tablet onto his desk. Let her have her 15 minutes of fame, he thought. It won't last. She'll still be nothing. He had a multi-million-dollar pitch to prepare for. He was trying to land a landmark infrastructure contract with Croft Enterprises, the notoriously exclusive and innovative firm, run by the reclusive billionaire Julian Croft. He didn't have time for Doris's pathetic little viral moment. When Doris arrived at the daily grind, it was chaos. The line of customers snaked around the corner. The small cafe was packed a news reporter trying to get a comment from a flustered Carol. Doris slipped in through the back entrance, her heart pounding. "I'm so sorry, Carol," she whispered, horrified. "I never meant for this to happen." Carol enveloped her in a flowery hug. "Sorry, honey. Don't you see? This is a miracle. We can finally afford to fix the espresso machine." The day was a blur of frantic baking, endless coffee orders, and answering the same questions over and over from smiling strangers. By late afternoon, a semblance of calm had returned. Doris was wiping down a flour-dusted counter, her body aching with exhaustion, when the bell chimed. The quiet man from the corner walked in. Today, however, he wasn't wearing his usual sweater and jeans. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark grey suit, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He looked less like a regular and more like he owned the building. He carried an air of quiet authority that filled the small space. He walked directly to the counter. "Hello, Doris," he said. His voice was calm and deep, and the sound of him saying her name sent a strange shiver through her. "Hello?" she replied, her hands suddenly feeling clumsy. I'm sorry, we're all out of the pain au chocolat for today." A small smile touched his lips. "That's quite all right. I actually came to talk to you about something else. Your Queen Yaman, specifically." He paused, his gaze warm and direct. "My name is Julian Croft." The name hit Doris like a physical blow. Julian Croft, the Julian Croft. The billionaire philanthropist, the tech genius who had disappeared from public life years ago. The man whose company Mark was obsessed with landing a deal with. It didn't seem possible. He saw the shock and disbelief on her face. "I'm a regular here," he said softly, as if to reassure her. "I believe in what you and Carol have built. And I was there yesterday. I saw what you did. It was remarkable. Your artistry, your empathy. It's a rare combination. I believe it deserves a much larger stage than this." Doris could only stare her mind, struggling to connect the dots. The quiet man in the corner, the viral video, the billionaire standing in front of her. Mark's mocking voice echoed in her head. "See how far that little baking hobby gets you." Julian Croft leaned forward slightly, his expression sincere. "I'd like to invest. Not just in the cafe, Doris. In you." The offer hung in the air between them, shimmering with impossibility. Doris stared at Julian Croft, searching his face for any sign that this was a joke, a prank, a dream she would soon wake from. But his eyes, a warm, intelligent brown, were completely serious. "Invest in me," she finally managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "In your talent," he clarified gently. "I run a foundation, the Croft Guild, that identifies and supports modern artisans, people who preserve classic crafts with a unique contemporary vision. Chefs, woodworkers, glass blowers, and I believe pastry artists like you. What you do is more than just baking. It's edible storytelling. I want to give you the resources to tell your stories on a grander scale." Carol, who had been listening from the side with wide-eyed wonder, let out a small squeak. Julian's proposal was professional, respectful, and overwhelmingly generous. He didn't want to buy the cafe, but rather to partner with them. He offered to fund a complete renovation upgrade, all the equipment, and provide Doris with a state-of-the-art baking lab. He also wanted to feature her in a documentary series his foundation was producing about artisans, which would lead to a book deal and her own product line. It was a lifetime of dreams, gift-wrapped, and handed to her by the quiet man who liked her croissants. A week later, Doris found herself sitting not in the wobbly chair at the cafe, but in a plush armchair in Julian Croft's private study. It wasn't the cold, ostentatious space she might have imagined. It was a warm, inviting room, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with old, well-loved volumes. The air smelled of aged paper and lemon oil. They were finalizing the details of their partnership. His team of lawyers had drafted a contract that was astonishingly fair, giving her and Carol complete creative control and a majority stake in their own business. "I have to ask Doris," said, setting her cup of tea down on a heavy oak table. "Why this is... It's an incredible amount of faith to put in a stranger." Julian leaned back, his gaze drifting to a collection of faded black and white photographs on the mantelpiece. "You're not a stranger, Doris. I've been watching you work for months. But it's more than that." He picked up a small leather-bound book from his desk. It was a handwritten recipe journal, the pages yellowed with age. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said, his voice soft with reverence. "She was French from a small village in Brittany. She was a baker. Not professionally, but it was her passion. She believed that pastry was a form of magic, a way to capture a memory or a feeling in a single bite." He opened the journal to a dog-eared page. The cursive was elegant, but faded. At the top of the page was written, "Gâteau de l'âme, the soul cake." She had a theory, Julian continued, a wistful smile on his face, that a certain combination of caramelized sugar, salted butter, and laminated dough, when made with intention, could soothe an agitated soul. She used to make it for me when I was a boy and had nightmares. It was her version of a quinoa man. The recipe was never written down perfectly. It was more of a philosophy. I've had chefs from all over the world try to replicate it from my memory, but no one ever could. The taste was right, but the feeling was missing. He looked directly at her, his eyes holding an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. "The pastry you gave to Mr. Henderson yesterday. That was it. That was my grandmother's soul cake. The feeling was the same." "How did you know how to make it?" Doris was stunned into silence. She thought of her own grandmother, the woman who had first taught her how to bake, whose inheritance Mark had squandered. She remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell of her own mother, who had learned her craft in a small French village before immigrating to America. "It's my great-grandmother's recipe," Doris whispered the words, feeling momentous on her tongue. She called it the patience cake. She always said it was for healing broken things. The air in the room grew still. The coincidence was too profound, too specific to be mere chance. It was a thread of history, a shared legacy of comfort and craft stretching across generations and continents that had somehow brought the two of them to this room. A baker from a small village in Brittany. It was entirely possible, even probable, that their ancestors had known each other, had shared a kitchen, had passed down the same philosophy of healing through their craft. In that moment, the relationship between them shifted. The wall of billionaire and baker, of investor and beneficiary, dissolved. They were two people connected by a shared secret history written in butter and sugar. A bond was forming deeper and more resonant than a simple business partnership. It was a connection that felt like coming home. As Doris left Julian's mansion that evening, her head spinning with the impossible turn her life had taken, she felt a genuine smile spread across her face for the first time in months. She was so lost in her thoughts that she almost missed the sleek black car parked across the street. Inside, Mark Jennings watched her leave the Croft estate, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. He had followed a lead from a contact who said Croft was meeting with a new artisan partner. He had expected it to be some Michelin-starred chef. But it was Doris. His Doris, walking out of Julian Croft's private residence, looking happier and more radiant than he had seen her in years. The condescending amusement he had felt was gone, replaced by a cold, searing rage. This wasn't a 15-minute fluke. This was a threat. She wasn't supposed to succeed. She was supposed to fail. She was supposed to prove him right. And now she was entangled with the one man whose approval he needed to secure his own future. A venomous new thought began to form in his mind. If he couldn't get her to fail, he would have to make her. Mark's world had tilted on its axis. Doris wasn't just surviving. She was on the verge of thriving in a way that directly threatened him. The Croft Enterprises deal was the biggest of his career, a company-making contract that would catapult him into the executive stratosphere. And now the gatekeeper to that kingdom was inexplicably charmed by his, supposedly, ambitionless ex-wife. His first move was insidious and calculated. He contacted a sleazy freelance journalist he had used in the past to plant negative stories about business rivals. "I have a tip," Mark said, his voice slick with false concern. "It's about this new Cafe Angel. Everyone's talking about Doris Vance. She has a history, a messy divorce. Seems she was quite the gold digger. Left her successful husband with nothing and is now trying to sink her claws into the reclusive billionaire Julian Croft. You might want to dig into that." Within 48 hours, the first story appeared on a notorious online gossip blog. Cafe Angel, or Angel of Deception. Sources say, viral baker Doris Vance has a gold-digging past. The article was a masterpiece of innuendo, twisting the truth of their divorce into a narrative where Doris was a manipulative predator and Mark was her long-suffering victim. It mentioned her sudden and mysterious connection to Croft, implying she had somehow orchestrated the entire viral event to trap him. The story was a small stone, but it created ripples. The overwhelmingly positive comments on the original video were now peppered with suspicion and vitriol. I knew it was too good to be true. Figures she was after his money. Another pretty face trying to snag a billionaire. Doris saw the article when Carol showed it to her on her phone, her face pale with fury. Reading the lies the twisted version of her life laid bare for public consumption felt like a physical violation. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that only one person could be behind this Mark. He wasn't content to have just left her. He wanted to destroy her reputation too. She wanted to curl into a ball and disappear. But a call from Julian changed that. I saw the article. He said, his voice a calm, steady anchor in her storm of anxiety. "It's gutter journalism, Doris. Patently absurd. Please don't let this person's poison touch you." "But people are believing it," she said, her voice trembling. "The people who matter," won't he assured her. "I've had my team trace the source. The journalist has a history of being paid for smear campaigns, often by competitors of his subjects. We're handling it. Do not engage. Do not respond. Just keep doing what you do. Create. That's your best answer." His unwavering faith in her was a shield. It emboldened her. But Mark was far from finished. When the smear campaign failed to derail the project, in fact, Julian accelerated the timeline for the cafe's renovation. In a show of public support, Mark escalated his tactics. He knew the final presentation for the Croft contract was in 2 weeks. He needed to get to Julian to sow a seed of doubt that even Julian's loyalty couldn't overcome. He used a back-channel connection to get Julian's private email address and sent a carefully worded message. Subject A. Private and urgent matter regarding Doris Vance, Mr. Croft. My name is Mark Jennings. I am Doris Vance's ex-husband. I am writing to you not out of malice, but out of genuine concern. I have seen the news about your partnership, and while I wish Doris all the best, I feel a moral obligation to warn you. Doris is a wonderful but deeply unstable woman. Our marriage ended because of her erratic behavior and financial irresponsibility, which I largely kept private to protect her. She has a history of creating elaborate fantasies and becoming attached to men she believes can save her. I am deeply worried that she has targeted you and that your generosity is being taken advantage of. I have documents, financial records, medical notes that would corroborate this. I would be happy to share them with you privately to protect you and your foundation from what could become a very embarrassing and costly situation. Sincerely, Mark Jennings. It was a vile, desperate gamble filled with damning lies. He had no such documents, but he hoped the threat alone would be enough to make Julian pull back. 2 days later, just as Mark was starting to think his email had been ignored, Doris showed up at the daily grind, looking shaken. The renovation was underway, and they were operating out of a temporary food truck Julian had provided. Julian's assistant called. She said to Carol, her hands clenched. "He's called an emergency meeting at his office this afternoon. With me, you and his entire legal team. They wouldn't say what it's about, just that it's critically urgent." A cold dread washed over Doris. It had worked. Mark's poison had seeped through. Julian was having second thoughts. He was going to pull out. The lawyers were there to sever the contract. All her dreams, which had felt so real just days ago, were about to turn to ash. The world was about to prove Mark right once and for all. Doris walked into the Croft Enterprises boardroom feeling like a prisoner on her way to sentencing. The room was intimidating, a long, polished mahogany table under a stark, modern chandelier, with a panoramic view of the city skyline. Julian was at the head of the table, his face unreadable. Carol sat beside Doris, squeezing her hand for support. Julian's legal team, 3 severe-looking men and women in dark suits, were arranged opposite them. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Julian began his tone formal and clipped. He slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was the email from Mark. "I received this 2 days ago." Doris's breath hitched as she read the venomous words. The lies about her mental stability, the fabricated history of financial ruin, the patronizing offer to save Julian from her. It was so much worse than she could have imagined. Humiliation washed over her, hot and suffocating. "Julian, She started, her voice breaking. "None of that is true. He's lying." Julian held up a hand, not to silence her, but to pause the moment. "Doris, I know he's lying. I never for a second believed it. Relief, so potent it made her dizzy, flooded through her. Then, what is this meeting about? This meeting?" Julian said, a hard edge entering his voice, "is about a breach of contract." "Not our contract, Doris, but the non-disclosure agreement that every potential partner, including Mark Jennings's firm, is required to sign before entering into negotiations with my company. An agreement which explicitly forbids any form of contact with me or my associates outside of official channels." He looked at his head counsel. "Is that correct, Ms. Albright?" The lead lawyer, a sharp woman with silver hair, nodded. "Mr. Jennings's unsolicited email is a flagrant violation. It immediately disqualifies his company Sterling Coal from the bidding process for the urban revitalization project." It took a moment for the words to sink in. Mark hadn't just failed to sabotage her. He had sabotaged himself. His attempt to poison Julian against her had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Furthermore, Julian continued, his gaze softening as he turned back to Doris. "An attack on one of my partners is an attack on me. I do not do business with people who operate this way. Which brings us to the second reason for this meeting." He gestured to an assistant who turned on a large screen at the end of the room. A live video feed appeared, showing the reception area of another boardroom across town. On the screen, Mark Jennings and his team were sitting nervously checking their watches. They were waiting to give their final presentation for the contract they had just been disqualified from. Mr. Jennings's presentation was scheduled for 3 p.m. Today, Julian said, a grim smile touching his lips. I thought it only fitting that he receive the news personally. He pressed a button on the conference phone. "Send him in." On the screen, an assistant opened the door to the other boardroom. Mark and his team stood up, plastering on confident smiles, and walked in. The room they entered was empty, save for a single, large monitor. Julian's face appeared on it, looking down at them like a wrathful god. Mr. Julian's voice boomed from the speakers. "Thank you for coming. I'm afraid your presentation will not be necessary." Mark's confident smile faltered. "Mr. Croft? I don't understand. It's quite simple. Croft Enterprises has a zero-tolerance policy for unethical behavior from its potential partners. Your unsolicited and slanderous email regarding Ms. Doris Vance constitutes such behavior. It was not only a breach of your NDA, but also a profound display of poor character. Effective immediately, Sterling Cole is permanently barred from any and all future dealings with my company." The color drained from Mark's face. He looked like he had been punched in the stomach. He stammered, But you don't know her. She's unstable." Suddenly the camera feed in Julian's boardroom switched to show Doris sitting tall and composed at the head of the table beside Julian. "Hello, Mark," she said, her voice steady and clear, broadcast into the room where he stood. Mark froze his eyes, widening in horror as he saw her. He looked from her image on the screen to Julian's, the terrible, humiliating truth of the situation crashing down on him. He had been played. He had walked right into a trap of his own making. As it happens, Julian's voice cut in cold as ice. "I am making it my business to know Ms. Vance. In fact, I'm proud to announce today that the Croft Guild is not only funding the relaunch of her cafe, but we will also be the primary investor in her new global brand of artisanal patisseries, Vance. The first flagship store will be opening in a property I own, the one your company was hoping to secure for its new headquarters. It was a total annihilating checkmate. In one move, Julian had not only defended Doris, but had also elevated her using the very foundation of Mark's ambition, the contract, the prestige, the property to build her empire. Mark stood there, utterly broken, his career in ruins, publicly humiliated in front of his entire team. The confident, arrogant man who had dismissed his ex-wife as nothing had been reduced to just that by the very woman he had tried to destroy. The video feed cut out, leaving the image of Mark's gaping, defeated face burned into Doris's memory. In the quiet of the boardroom, Doris looked at Julian, her heart full of a gratitude, so immense she couldn't speak. He hadn't just saved her. He had empowered her to save herself. He had given her a stage, and she had delivered the final line. The fallout for Mark Jennings was not a quiet fizzle, but a resounding crash. His public firing from Sterling Cole was the talk of the financial district, a cautionary tale whispered over expensive lunches and in hushed elevator rides. The story was just too perfect, the arrogant executive brought down by the ex-wife he'd underestimated. He was professionally radioactive. Every door he knocked on was politely but firmly closed in his face. His name was now inextricably linked with failure, poor judgment, and worst of all, being on the losing side of a story that had captured the public's heart. Months later, he stood in the checkout line of a drab suburban grocery store, 1,000 miles from the city where he had once been a king. On the magazine rack, Doris's face smiled back at him from the cover of Food and Wine. The headline read, "Doris Vance, the sweetheart of a second act." Her eyes sparkled with a confidence he had never seen before, a light he had tried and failed to extinguish. He saw people in line glance from the magazine cover to him, a flicker of recognition and pity in their eyes. In that moment, he was truly nothing. He had lost his career, his reputation, and the respect of everyone he knew. He was just a bitter man in a grocery store, haunted by the ghost of a woman who had become a queen. For Doris, life had re-blossomed with the vibrant, complex beauty of one of her own sugar flowers. The grand reopening of the Daily Grind by Vance was a spectacle. The old, charmingly chipped facade was now restored with large, welcoming windows and a classic navy blue awning. Inside the space was a symphony of warm woods, soft lighting, and the intoxicating scent of butter chocolate and brewing coffee. The centerpiece was the new kitchen, a glass-walled marvel where customers could watch Doris and her growing team work their magic. It was less a kitchen and more a theater, and Doris was its celebrated star. Her fame was solidified with the release of her episode in the Croft Guild's documentary series, In the Hands of the Maker. The episode told her story with grace and power, contrasting the cold emptiness of her former life with the warm, vibrant community she had built at the cafe. It ended with the powerful footage Cynthia Plate had captured, a moment of kindness that had started it all. She was no longer just the Aorshus Cafe angel. She was Doris Vance, an artist, an entrepreneur, and an inspiration. The book deal followed, as did offers for television shows and product lines. She was building an empire, one perfect pastry at a time. Her relationship with Julian was the quiet, steady foundation beneath it all. It was a love that flourished not in grand gestures, but in shared moments of peace and understanding. One evening, long after the last customer had left, they sat together in the darkened cafe, the only light coming from the warm glow of the pastry case. Doris brought him a small plate with a new creation, a delicate mousse infused with Earl Grey tea and bergamot. He took a bite, his eyes closing in appreciation. "It tastes like a foggy morning in London," he said softly. "How do you do that? How do you put a memory on a plate?" Doris smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "My great-grandmother used to say that we bake with more than our hands. We bake with everything we've ever felt." She looked around the beautiful, quiet cafe, her cafe. "For a long time, all I felt was loss. I think that's why my baking had to get better. It was the only way I knew how to heal myself. And then I met you. I think Julian said, taking her hand, that we were both a little lost, and we found our way to the same place. It was a love built on mutual rescue, a partnership of two souls who understood that the most beautiful things are often the ones that have been carefully repaired." A year after Mark had walked out of her life, Doris stood on a brightly lit stage in a grand ballroom in New York City, accepting the prestigious Artisan of the Year award from the Culinary Guild. She wore an elegant floor-length gown, the color of midnight, her hands holding the heavy, polished award. Looking out at the sea of faces, she felt a profound sense of peace. Her mind briefly flashed back to that cold, grey living room, to the echo of a deadbolt sliding shut. She remembered the crushing weight of his final words, the curse meant to be her life sentence. "You are nothing without me. You will never find love again." He had been wrong on a scale that was almost cosmic. Losing him wasn't an ending. It was an excavation. It had forced her to dig through the rubble of a life built for someone else and unearth the foundations of her own. She had discovered that she was not a supporting character in someone else's story. She was the author of her own. Her gaze found Julian in the front row. He wasn't smiling a triumphant, gloating smile. He was simply watching her, his eyes filled with a deep, unwavering love and profound respect. Beside him, Carol was openly weeping with joy, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. In them, Doris saw her future. Bringing the microphone closer, she cleared her throat. "Thank you. she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing through the silent ballroom. There was a time when I believed my life was over, when I was told that my passion was just a hobby and that I was nothing on my own. But I learned that your true value is never determined by those who choose to leave you. It's determined by what you build in the space they leave behind. She looked down at the award, then back at the crowd, her smile genuine and radiant. This is for anyone who has ever been made to feel small. Your moment is coming. Just keep building. The ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. Doris Vance was no longer running from her past. She was standing on top of it, the view from here more beautiful than anything she could have ever dared to imagine. Doris's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the end is just the beginning in disguise. It shows us that our lowest moments do not have to define us. Mark's cruel words were meant to be a cage, but Doris transformed them into a key, unlocking a strength and talent she had suppressed for far too long. She didn't just find love again. She built a new life, an empire of her own, founded on kindness, creativity, and the courage to be herself. Her journey from a heartbroken woman in an empty house to a celebrated artisan on a global stage proves that the best revenge isn't anger or bitterness. It's living a life more beautiful and successful than your detractors could ever have imagined. What did you think of Doris's incredible transformation? Have you ever had a moment where someone's negativity accidentally pushed you toward your own success? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. If you were inspired by Doris's journey, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of triumph and karmic justice.